Chapter 1. The Invitation to Foxwood Hall. The letter arrived one soft June morning as Hercule Poirot was finishing his breakfast of brioche, honey, and a most symmetrical boiled egg. He regarded it with curiosity before cutting it open with the precise flick of a silver knife. The handwriting was bold, English, and masculine, a man accustomed to command. The paper bore a crest, Foxwood Hall, Somerset. He adjusted his napkin with the habitual neatness that was almost a ceremony with him, and began to read. My dear Monsieur Poirot, you may not recall me, but we met last year at the Savoy, through our mutual acquaintance Lord Cartwright. My wife, Lady Margaret, and I are holding our annual Midsummer charity ball at our country home in Somerset on the 23rd. It would give us the greatest pleasure if you would grace the occasion with your presence. Forgive the liberty of inviting you without more acquaintance. The event has become somewhat celebrated in these parts, and, if I may be frank, a touch of your fame would lend our little gathering distinction. There will be dancing, a midnight supper, and, I trust, good company. The train to Taunton is most convenient, and my car will await you there. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Chudleigh. Poirot smiled faintly, folded the letter, and placed it beside his egg cup. A country ball, he murmured. With champagne, dancing, and no doubt, how do you say social ambitions? Mon Dieu, what it is to be English. From the adjoining room came the sound of a chair scraping. What's that you say, Poirot? Came the brisk, familiar voice of Captain Hastings, his companion in many investigations. Something amusing, old fellow? Poirot handed him the letter, carefully avoiding smudging the crest with butter. Read, Hastings. See how the fame of Hercule Poirot travels even to the green countryside. Hastings read, frowning slightly. Charity ball at Foxwood Hall, Somerset. Good heavens, I know of the place. It's a fine estate, old money, quite the local showpiece. Rather grand people, the Chudleighs. Ah, said Poirot, eyes brightening. You have knowledge, then. Tell me, mon ami, what manner of people are these Chudleighs? Hastings considered. Sir Reginald served in the Colonial Office, I believe. Retired some years ago. Pleasant fellow, though a bit pompous. Lady Margaret, very beautiful in her youth, rather distant now. There's talk that their fortunes have, well, diminished somewhat. Fortunes? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Always the fortunes, they are like the English weather, no? Sometimes cloudy, sometimes fine, but never reliable. He pushed aside his plate and gazed thoughtfully out of the window. I am invited to a ball, Hastings, and where there are many people there is always, how shall I put it, le drame humain. It interests me. Hastings laughed. Surely you can allow yourself one evening of pleasure without imagining murder lurking behind every flower arrangement. Pleasure, mon ami, is in the mind. For me, it is the observation of character. The dance floor reveals more truth than a courtroom. I shall go. Hastings's eyes gleamed. And I, old chap? Poirot inclined his head graciously. But of course, where Poirot goes, Hastings must observe and write and ask his little questions. It is the natural order of things. You know, Poirot, said Hastings, I must say I'm looking forward to this. There's something delightful about these country occasions. Music on the lawns, lanterns in the trees, the ladies in white gowns. Poirot smiled indulgently. You are the romantic, Hastings. But remember, behind the white gown may lurk the heart of a serpent. Rubbish. You're incorrigible. Hastings retorted, laughing. I dare say we'll have nothing more sinister than a few tipsy guests and perhaps some jealous glances. Perhaps, Poirot murmured and folded his timetable. But it is the jealous glances, mon ami, that lead most often to tragedy. The car from Foxwood Hall met them at Taunton Station, a gleaming Rolls-Royce driven by a liveried chauffeur. The countryside grew more secluded as they approached the estate. Winding lanes, thick hedgerows, the air rich with the scent of roses and mown grass. When at last they passed the wrought-iron gates of Foxwood Hall, Hastings gave a low whistle. Splendid place. Look at those lawns, and the house itself. Georgian, I should say. Poirot nodded approvingly. The mansion rose above sweeping gardens, its pale stone glowing in the late afternoon sun. Long windows reflected the sky, and an avenue of lime trees led up to a great porticoed entrance. Everything was stately, but not quite peaceful. There was, Poirot felt at once, an unease beneath the beauty, an undercurrent of tension, like a discordant note in music. Sir Reginald Chudley received them in the drawing-room. A tall, vigorous man with graying hair and a hearty, practiced manner. "Monsieur Poirot, a tremendous honor. And Captain Hastings, how good of you both to come. Lady Margaret is dying to meet you." Lady Margaret entered a moment later. She was a woman of perhaps 45, still handsome, though the delicate features seemed strained. Her gown of pale lavender suited her perfectly, yet her smile was too brief, her eyes too anxious. Poirot bowed low, taking her hand. "Madam, I am enchanted." "Such a pleasure, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "We are so grateful you accepted our invitation. Sir Reginald speaks of little else." Poirot observed her keenly. There was intelligence in her eyes, and something else. Fear, perhaps, or sorrow carefully concealed. "It is I who am honored, madam," he said. "I am told that Foxwood Hall is famed for its hospitality." She inclined her head. "It was once. These days we do our best." Dinner that evening was elegant but subdued. Among the guests staying at the hall were Dr. Leonard Brooks, the local physician, a quiet man with intense, nervous eyes, and Mrs. Beatrice Ellison, Lady Margaret's cousin, who spoke sharply on every subject and seemed to find the world in general unsatisfactory. There was also Major Gerald Forbes, a bluff, jovial fellow who drank more than was wise and told interminable stories of his days in India. The talk, as it often does among the English, revolved around the weather, the forthcoming ball, and the latest village gossip. Poirot listened politely, occasionally interjecting a mild observation. His small, neat eyes missed nothing. He noted the way Lady Margaret's fingers tightened upon her wineglass when her husband mentioned a name, Miss Evelyn Grant. He observed, too, the brief silence that followed. Later, as the guests retired, Hastings turned to him. "What a lovely place, Poirot? And Lady Margaret. Rather charming, don't you think?" Poirot looked thoughtful. "Yes, but she is a woman who has known great worry, Hastings. It is written upon her face." "Really? I thought she seemed quite, well, normal." Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mon ami, is the most dangerous appearance of all." They reached their adjoining rooms. Through the open window drifted the faint sound of an orchestra rehearsing in the distant ballroom. The summer night lay still and fragrant, and far below, the lawns of Foxwood Hall gleamed pale under the rising moon. Poirot paused before extinguishing his lamp. "A beautiful house, Hastings, but beauty, you will recall, is sometimes the mask that hides decay. I wonder what secrets this Foxwood Hall conceals." Hastings laughed lightly. "You're incorrigible, Poirot. We're here for a ball, not a case." Poirot's reflection in the mirror smiled back at him. Small, composed, and faintly ironic. "Mais oui, Hastings, but I have the little feeling, the instinct, that before this visit is over, there will indeed be a case. And not a little one." He turned out the light. Outside, the night deepened, and in the quiet corridors of Foxwood Hall, the air seemed to whisper of approaching tragedy. Chapter 2. The Midsummer Ball. The morning of the Midsummer Ball dawned clear and golden over Foxwood Hall. From the terrace, one could see the meadows shimmering under the sun, and beyond them, the faint blue haze of the Quantock Hills. The air was filled with the fragrance of roses, lavender, and the faint hum of preparation. Servants hurried discreetly about, gardeners trimmed the lawns for the marquee, and the great chandeliers in the ballroom were being polished until they glittered like ice. At breakfast, Lady Margaret presided with her usual grace, though Poirot noted that her hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea. Sir Reginald was in high spirits, issuing orders, consulting lists, and speaking of splendid attendance and honored guests. "The Taunton Gazette has promised a column, my dear," he said, spreading marmalade upon his toast. "Lord Cartwright himself will attend, and I hear young Arthur Penrose has returned from London with Miss Grant." Poirot, who was delicately buttering a croissant, looked up. "Ah, Miss Grant. She is the young lady of whom you spoke last night, n'est-ce pas?" "Yes, yes," Sir Reginald replied cheerfully. "Miss Evelyn Grant. Delightful girl. Quite the belle of the county this season. Inherited her late uncle's fortune last year. Lives now with her aunt in Bath, but spends much of her time here. She's engaged to Arthur Penrose, a fine young man, though perhaps a trifle too fond of the gaming table." Lady Margaret's voice, quiet but firm, interjected. "Evelyn is a dear child. I've known her since she was 10. She has a good heart." Poirot inclined his head. "And she is to be present tonight?" "Of course," Lady Margaret replied with a forced brightness. "The ball would not be complete without her. She has promised to arrive by 4. She will be staying the night." Poirot smiled, sipping his coffee. "Ah, I see. A fete in honor of summer, of youth, and of love. Quelle belle combinaison. And yet," he added softly, "such occasions have a way of revealing the shadows behind the brightness." Hastings laughed from across the table. "You'll have everyone afraid to dance, Poirot. For heaven's sake, it's only a party." "Only?" murmured Poirot. "Mon ami, it is never only a party when human hearts are involved." By late afternoon, the lawns of Foxwood Hall had been transformed. White tents stood like sails in the sunlight, musicians tuned their instruments beneath the awning, and tables were laden with crystal bowls of punch, pyramids of fruit, and shining silver trays. The guests began to arrive. Ladies in gowns of pale silk and chiffon, gentlemen in crisp evening dress, laughter mingling with the rustle of skirts and the clink of glasses. Poirot, immaculate in black tie and with his mustache gleaming magnificently, observed everything with serene composure. Hastings, at his side, looked distinctly more animated. "What do you think, Poirot? Quite a turnout, eh?" Poirot's gaze moved slowly over the crowd. "Yes, observe Hastings, the young man by the fountain, that will be Mr. Penrose. He laughs too easily, but there is strain beneath it. And the lady in the blue gown with the pearls? Voila, Miss Evelyn Grant, I think." She was indeed beautiful, fair, with intelligent gray eyes and an expression that combined self-assurance with restlessness. As she moved through the crowd, people turned to greet her. She seemed to draw attention naturally, yet her smile came and went with a flicker of unease. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. A young woman who is admired, envied, and perhaps resented. That is never a simple position. Before Hastings could reply, Sir Reginald joined them, his face aglow. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, you must allow me to present you properly. Miss Grant, my dear, this is the famous detective himself, Monsieur Hercule Poirot." Evelyn smiled, extending her hand. "How wonderful to meet you, Monsieur Poirot. I've read of your cases in the newspapers. You must find Somerset dreadfully quiet after London." Poirot bowed slightly. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, I find that the quiet places often conceal the most interesting events." Her laughter was quick, a little too bright. "Well, I hope you'll find nothing too interesting here tonight." "Indeed," Poirot said softly. "Let us hope so." At that moment Arthur Penrose joined them. A tall, striking young man with easy charm and eyes that darted a little too quickly. He greeted Poirot courteously, but his manner toward Evelyn was possessive, almost protective. Poirot observed it in silence, his fingertips touching lightly as if arranging unseen thoughts. As dusk fell, the ball truly began. Lanterns were lit along the terrace. The band struck up a waltz. The air shimmered with laughter, perfume, and the scent of roses. Couples glided across the polished floor of the ballroom, the chandeliers above scattering light like diamonds. Lady Margaret moved among her guests with gracious formality, yet more than once Poirot saw her glance anxiously toward Evelyn Grant. Once, as he followed her gaze, he noticed something else, a woman standing alone near the open doors to the garden. It was Mrs. Beatrice Ellison, Lady Margaret's cousin. Her sharp eyes were fixed on Evelyn and Arthur, her expression one of bitter calculation. "She does not approve," murmured Poirot. "Who?" asked Hastings, following his gaze. "Madame Ellison. There, near the hydrangeas. See how she watches. That is not the gaze of goodwill. Oh, nonsense, said Hastings. You see mysteries everywhere, Poirot. Toujours, my friend. It is my profession. The evening progressed. There was laughter, champagne, dancing, until, shortly before midnight, the orchestra paused and Sir Reginald called for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, before the clock strikes 12, may I propose a toast, to friendship, to generosity, and to the enduring spirit of summer. May the good fortune that smiles upon us tonight remain always. Glasses were raised. Champagne sparkled under the chandeliers. Poirot, ever meticulous, noticed the distribution of the glasses by the footmen, one to each guest, poured fresh from 2 large crystal decanters. Lady Margaret's hand shook slightly as she lifted hers. Evelyn Grant, standing near the center of the floor, smiled radiantly and raised her glass high. To the Midsummer Ball, she cried. The company echoed her cheer and drank. The clock chimed midnight. The band resumed. Laughter and music swelled again. And then, as the final chime faded, a sudden cry rose above the hum of conversation. Evelyn Grant had staggered. Her glass fell, shattering upon the marble floor. For a moment she clutched at her throat, her eyes wide with terror, and then she collapsed heavily, her white gown pooling around her like a broken lily. For a few seconds there was only stunned silence. Then a woman screamed. Sir Reginald rushed forward. Hastings instinctively moved to assist. Poirot, calm amid the chaos, knelt beside the fallen girl. Her lips were pale, her pulse fluttering faintly beneath his fingertips. Quickly, he said, send for Dr. Brooks. The doctor, already pushing through the crowd, dropped to his knees. Good Lord, Miss Grant, give her air. Lady Margaret, please, stand back. He fumbled for his case, his hands visibly shaking. Poirot watched him work, his eyes expressionless. Within minutes it was clear that nothing could be done. Dr. Brooks sat back on his heels, his face ashen. She's gone, he said hoarsely. I don't understand. She was perfectly well an hour ago. Poirot rose slowly, his small figure very still amid the gathering panic. She is dead. Yes, whispered Lady Margaret, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. Dead at the ball. Poirot's gaze moved to the shattered glass on the floor, the traces of champagne glistening like tears. His mind was already working, precise, relentless. No one must leave the house, he said quietly. Sir Reginald, you will have the doors secured at once. Until we know how this young lady died, Foxwood Hall must remain. How do you say self-contained? Sir Reginald stared at him in disbelief. Good heavens, Poirot. You can't mean. I mean, mon cher Sir Reginald, that something very wicked has occurred here tonight. A young woman does not die thus, in the midst of laughter, without reason. He turned to Hastings, his expression grave. It begins, my friend. And as the murmuring crowd closed in, Poirot's gaze rested once more upon the broken glass at his feet. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a tiny, glimmering clue amid the ruin of festivity. Chapter 3, The Fatal Toast. For several moments after the cry, the ballroom of Foxwood Hall remained suspended in an almost supernatural stillness. The orchestra had fallen silent. The dancers stood motionless, faces drained of color. The only sound was the faint, delicate tinkle of the broken glass fragments at Miss Evelyn Grant's feet as someone shifted uneasily. Poirot rose from where he had knelt beside the body. The expression on his face was one Hastings knew well, a quiet, contained gravity that meant the great detective's mind had already set to work. Please, Poirot said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. No one is to move the body or touch anything nearby. Dr. Brooks, if you will confirm once more that life is extinct. The physician, pale and shaken, bent again over the young woman. After a moment he looked up and shook his head. She's gone. It must have been sudden. I can't yet say how. Naturally not, murmured Poirot. We shall see. Hastings, draw the curtains, if you please. There is no need for all these eyes. As Hastings moved to obey, Poirot turned to Sir Reginald, who stood bewildered, one hand on the back of a chair. Sir Reginald, I must beg that the house be secured at once. No guest must depart, and no servant either. The local police will, of course, need to be summoned. Sir Reginald blinked. The police? Good heavens, Poirot. Surely this isn't an accident? Poirot's eyes were keen and very bright. Mais non, mon ami. A healthy young woman does not die so swiftly, so theatrically, without warning. There is method here and intent. Lady Margaret gave a small gasp. You mean, she's been murdered? Poirot inclined his head gravely. It is one possibility, madam, and at present, it is the only one that fits the facts. There was a murmur among the guests. Shocked whispers, exclamations of disbelief. Hastings noted how certain individuals reacted. Mrs. Beatrice Ellison had turned away sharply, dabbing at her lips with a handkerchief. Major Forbes stood grim and silent, his habitual joviality gone. Arthur Penrose was on his knees beside Evelyn, gripping her limp hand and staring as though his world had ended. Poirot watched him a moment before speaking. Monsieur Penrose, you must allow the doctor to do his duty. You can do nothing for her now. Arthur looked up, his eyes wild. She was fine, laughing. She toasted the ball and then she just fell. She couldn't breathe. Indeed, said Poirot softly. And you, monsieur, where were you standing when she drank? Beside her. We toasted together. Everyone did. Poirot nodded. And she drank from her own glass, I presume? Yes, said Arthur dully. The waiter handed it to her. Poirot turned his gaze upon the footman who stood trembling by the door. You, come here. The young man approached hesitantly. Yes, sir. You poured the champagne? Yes, sir. Well, not me, sir. Mr. Dobson, the butler, filled the decanters. I only served them round, sir. Ah, 2 decanters, yes. Yes, sir. Both from the same bottles, I think. Poirot's mustache twitched faintly. You think? You are not certain. Well, sir, the footman stammered. Mr. Dobson had 1 bottle already open. He said it would do for the first decanter, then opened another for the second. I just took them both to the hall, sir. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Merci. That will do for now. He turned to Lady Margaret. Madam, might I ask where the decanters are kept between pourings? In the anteroom beyond the ballroom, she said faintly. There's a sideboard there for refilling glasses. I believe Dobson supervised it. Poirot nodded once. Good. We shall examine it. By the time Inspector Harold Cray arrived from the local constabulary, the guests had been shepherded into the library, subdued and pale. The police surgeon had been sent for, and Miss Grant's body removed discreetly to an upstairs room. Poirot stood at the center of the ballroom, surveying the scene with eyes that missed nothing. Inspector Cray was a big, solid man with a mustache of his own, though far less distinguished than Poirot's. He greeted the detective respectfully but not without a hint of defensiveness. Evening, sir. Terrible business. I understand you were on the spot. Exactment, Inspector. And that is both fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate, for I observed certain things. Unfortunate, for it means that I have no excuse to leave this beautiful place before my work is done. Inspector Cray blinked. Work? Poirot gestured toward the fragments of glass on the floor. You will wish to collect that. It is the instrument, perhaps, of the crime. Miss Grant's glass, broken when she fell. Cray nodded, signaling to a constable. You think poison, then? Poirot spread his hands. It is the obvious supposition. There are no marks of violence, no sign of heart failure. She choked. Yes, but upon what? Upon air. He moved toward the sideboard in the adjoining room. Let us look, eh bien? The sideboard gleamed under the light, its surface immaculate save for 2 decanters, each still half full, and a scatter of corks and napkins. Poirot examined them minutely. 1 decanter bore a tiny smear upon the rim, hardly visible unless one looked closely. He touched it lightly with a handkerchief, sniffed, and frowned. An odor, faint, bitter, unpleasant. Inspector, you will preserve this decanter carefully. And the glasses used by those nearest Miss Grant. Cray whistled softly. You don't waste time, do you? I never waste, said Poirot. Not time, not observation. He straightened and turned to Hastings, who had followed silently. Do you recall, mon ami, how the glasses were distributed? Hastings thought. Yes, 2 footmen served them from trays, starting from opposite sides of the room. Miss Grant was near the center. And did you see which decanter filled her glass? Hastings hesitated. No, I can't be sure. I think the left-hand tray, perhaps. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The left-hand tray, yes. And the decanter upon the left-hand sideboard bears the mark. Interesting. He looked up as Sir Reginald entered, pale and haggard. Monsieur Poirot, I am at your disposal. Anything you require. Poirot inclined his head courteously. You are most obliging. Tell me, had Miss Grant any enemies? Enemies? Sir Reginald stared. Good heavens, no. She was admired by everyone. Ah, mais non, Poirot said gently. To be admired by everyone, that is impossible. To be loved by one person, that is rare enough. But to be admired by all? That, my friend, invites envy. Sir Reginald passed a hand across his brow. I can't think who would wish her harm. Poirot was silent a moment. Then, very quietly, he said, We shall find who has wished her harm by finding who feared her truth. It was past 2 in the morning before the guests were permitted to retire. Poirot remained downstairs, seated in a small study that Lady Margaret had offered him for his use. Hastings joined him there, rubbing his eyes wearily. Good Lord, Poirot, he said. What a ghastly night. Poor girl. And everyone's nerves in tatters. Poirot nodded, his hands steepled. Yes, but already, Hastings, we have learned much. Observe, the decanter only one bears the trace. Therefore, the poison was not in the bottles, but introduced after the champagne was poured. It required opportunity and precision. You mean someone slipped it in before the toast? Precisely. Someone who could approach the sideboard unnoticed. Someone with access, either a servant or a guest. Hastings frowned. But why Evelyn Grant? Why her? Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where dawn was beginning to pale the horizon. That, Hastings, is the question that will reveal the killer. There is always a reason, though sometimes it is wrapped in the glitter of love, or jealousy, or money. One must only look beneath. He rose and began to pace, his voice low, almost reflective. Miss Grant was young, wealthy, engaged. She stood at the center of many emotions. Admiration, envy, perhaps resentment. Her death, I think, will unravel more than one little mystere. And what of Arthur Penrose? Asked Hastings. He seemed genuinely distraught. Poirot stopped, regarding him thoughtfully. Yes, but grief, mon ami, can wear many faces. We shall see which is his. There was a knock at the door. Lady Margaret entered, pale but composed. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. I could not sleep. The image of her, of poor Evelyn, haunts me. Poirot bowed slightly. You are brave, madam. But tell me, was Miss Grant in good spirits before the ball? A hesitation, slight but perceptible. She was restless, I think. There was something on her mind. But she would not speak of it. Poirot's eyes glinted. And did she quarrel with anyone? Lady Margaret hesitated again, then said, Only with her fiancé, Mr. Penrose. It was nothing, I believe, a trifling disagreement. Ah! Poirot exclaimed softly. The trifles, madam. They are the threads from which the tapestry of murder is woven. He bowed again. You have been most helpful. Rest if you can. Tomorrow will be long. When she had gone, Hastings looked at him uneasily. You think Penrose? Poirot raised a hand. Think, Hastings? None. I only observe. But remember this. When the glass was lifted to the light, there were many smiles and only one death. I must discover why. He turned back toward the table, where the 2 decanters stood like twin sentinels under the lamplight. The faint odor of bitterness still lingered in the air. "It began with a toast," Poirot murmured, half to himself, "and the glass that glittered most brightly contained death." Chapter 4. The questions begin. Morning came to Foxwood Hall with a pale, uneasy light. The lawns glistened with dew, the peacocks cried from the terrace, and yet the house seemed to hold its breath. The laughter and music of the midsummer ball were now ghosts, faint echoes that mocked the silence left behind. Poirot was up early. He sat in the morning room, immaculately dressed, sipping strong black coffee while his eyes rested upon a neat row of notes before him. Each card bore a name, a few jotted lines of observation, and one small detail marked with a question mark. "Routine, Hastings," he murmured. "The good Inspector Cray will wish to interview everyone in the ordinary fashion, but moi, I prefer to begin where emotion betrays reason. The heart, mon ami, is always less careful than the brain." Hastings, still looking half asleep, set down his own coffee. "You mean you're going to question them yourself?" "Mais oui. With tact, of course. We will not call it interrogation, we will call it conversation." Poirot smiled faintly. "And you, my dear Hastings, shall observe their faces while I observe their souls." At that moment Inspector Cray entered. His manner was brisk, though he looked as though he'd slept little. "Morning, gentlemen. I've spoken with the coroner. He'll be here by noon to examine the body. Preliminary opinion, poison, as you said. Possibly cyanide, though we'll know for sure soon enough." "Bon," said Poirot softly. "Then we waste no time. Let us begin." The first to be interviewed was Arthur Penrose. He looked haggard, his fair hair untidy, his face drawn. His eyes had the dazed, sunken look of a man whose world had been overturned. "Mr. Penrose," Poirot said gently, "I understand that you were engaged to Miss Grant." "Yes," he said hoarsely, "for nearly 6 months." "And all was well between you?" Arthur hesitated. We'd had a few quarrels. Evelyn could be impulsive, you know, but nothing serious." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Perhaps about her inheritance?" Arthur looked up sharply. "Her inheritance? No, of course not. Why should it be?" "Because," said Poirot mildly, "it is a curious coincidence, n'est-ce pas? Miss Grant was to receive full control of her fortune on her 25th birthday, which happens to be tomorrow. And now, alas, she will never see it." Arthur's face went white. "I didn't know that." "Non." Poirot's voice was quiet. "But you were engaged to her." "Yes, but she didn't talk about money. She wasn't that sort of girl." Poirot regarded him keenly. "And last night, there was a quarrel?" Arthur swallowed hard. "It wasn't a quarrel, exactly. She said she wanted to postpone the wedding. Said she needed to think. I was angry, yes, but only because I loved her." "Of course." Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me, did you drink from your own glass, or hers?" Arthur blinked. "Hers? Why would I? No, mine." "Yet they were close together on the tray," Poirot murmured. "And it is easy, in the confusion of a toast, for hands to exchange." Arthur frowned. "You think I drank the poisoned one by mistake?" Poirot's lips curved faintly. "No, monsieur, I think Miss Grant drank it by design. The design of another." Next came Lady Margaret Ellison, the hostess. She had regained some composure, but her eyes were weary and red-rimmed. "My dear madam," said Poirot, "it was a most tragic evening. Tell me, had you known Miss Grant long?" "For several years," said Lady Margaret softly. "Her mother and I were friends. Evelyn spent part of her girlhood here. She was like a daughter to me." Poirot inclined his head. "Then her engagement to Mr. Penrose must have pleased you?" "I thought it would make her happy." Lady Margaret's tone faltered. But lately she seemed troubled, distracted even. "Troubled by what, do you think?" The lady hesitated. There was something about Major Forbes. He admired her, perhaps too openly. Evelyn didn't encourage him, but Arthur resented it. There was tension. "Ah," said Poirot softly, "the eternal triangle." Lady Margaret looked distressed. "Surely you don't think I think only that passion, jealousy, greed. These are the ingredients from which tragedy is cooked, madam. Before she could reply, Inspector Cray entered briefly to announce that breakfast was ready in the small dining room. Poirot waved it aside. Merci, but my appetite is for truth, not toast. The next guest was Major Gerald Forbes, tall, ruddy, and outwardly calm, though Poirot saw the tightness around his jaw. You were acquainted with Miss Grant for some time, Major? Yes, met her last summer at Cowes. A charming girl. Fine spirit. And you admired her? He smiled grimly. I'd have been blind not to. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And her fiancé, did he share that sentiment? Forbes hesitated. Penrose didn't like me. Thought I was too attentive. But I never crossed a line. I knew she was promised to him. Poirot's voice was very soft. Yet sometimes, Major, the heart forgets what the mind remembers. Forbes met his gaze squarely. Are you suggesting I poisoned her? Poirot shrugged delicately. I suggest nothing. I merely note that opportunity and motive sometimes waltz together. The Major flushed. If you're implying I'd kill a woman I admired, then you're wrong. Poirot bowed slightly. Then we shall find you innocent, mon capitaine. The questioning continued through the morning. Mrs. Beatrice Ellison, Sir Reginald's widowed sister, nervous and fluttering. Mr. Dobson, the butler, correct but uneasy, and 2 footmen, both visibly frightened. Poirot asked few questions but noted much. He watched eyes, fingers, the tremor of a hand upon a teacup, the instinctive glance toward the decanter still sealed away in evidence. By the time the coroner arrived, the morning had darkened with heavy clouds. Poirot stood with Inspector Cray in the hallway, speaking quietly. Tell me, Inspector, did you find anything among Miss Grant's belongings? Cray nodded. A few letters, mostly harmless. One from a solicitor in London confirming that her trust would revert to her control this week. Nothing suspicious. Poirot tapped his chin. And her handbag? Just a handkerchief, a mirror, and a small bottle of perfume. Poirot raised a brow. Perfume? Let me see it. Cray handed it over. Poirot uncorked the tiny stopper, sniffed, and smiled faintly. Trace interessant. Not perfume, Inspector, at least not entirely. There is something else mixed in. Something acrid. Cray frowned. Poison, perhaps, but not the poison that killed her. No, this is something different. Something that frightened her. He handed the vial back. You will have it tested, of course. Cray nodded grimly. You've a theory, I suppose? Poirot smiled thinly. A theory? Mais oui, but it is like a soufflé delicate. One must not open the oven too soon. That afternoon, Poirot requested that the guests remain in the drawing room. The rain had begun to fall softly against the windows, and the mood was subdued. Poirot stood before them, a small, dignified figure commanding the silence. Mesdames et messieurs, he began. I thank you for your patience. The police will continue their inquiries, but there are certain matters I wish to clarify. His eyes moved slowly across the room, pausing momentarily on each face. Miss Grant, before her death, was about to receive control of a considerable fortune. She intended, I believe, to make certain changes in her will, changes that might have affected one or more persons here. A collective murmur stirred the room. Poirot raised a hand. It is not gossip, it is fact. I have seen a note in her handwriting, unfinished, yet revealing. It begins, to be sure my estate goes only to those who have shown me true kindness. Lady Margaret gasped. Then she had been thinking about her will. Indeed, Poirot said. And perhaps she spoke of it, or someone overheard. He paced slowly. We know the poison was introduced into the champagne decanter. We know it was not present in the bottle. Therefore, it was done here in this house. The question is, by whom? He stopped abruptly beside the fireplace. It required access, discretion, and motive. One of these you all possess. But only one of you had the courage or the desperation to act. No one spoke. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. Poirot's tone softened. There is another clue, untraced petit detail. The poison glass was not only hers. The rim bore traces of lipstick but also of something else. Something that tells me another hand touched it, briefly, before it reached her. Arthur Penrose stirred. You mean someone switched the glasses? Poirot looked at him gravely. Perhaps, monsieur. Or perhaps someone ensured that she would choose that particular one. He turned to Inspector Cray. I must ask that the servants be assembled once more, particularly the footman who carried the tray from the anteroom. There is a question I have long wished to ask him. He straightened, his eyes bright as the first flash of lightning lit the windows. The questions, Miss Amos, he said softly, have only just begun. Chapter 5, The Red Herrings. The rain had not ceased since morning. Foxwood Hall, wrapped in a gray shroud of mist and drizzle, seemed smaller now, almost claustrophobic. The grandeur of the house that had glittered beneath lanterns and laughter the night before now felt oppressive. Its corridors too quiet, its rooms too still. Poirot stood near the long window of the library, gazing out across the drenched lawns where the marble statues glimmered ghost-like through the rain. Behind him, Hastings sat in an armchair, attempting to make sense of his friend's small, precise notes. I must say, Poirot, Hastings began, you've written down more contradictions than clues. You have Sir Reginald marked as desperate, not dangerous, Lady Margaret as knows more than she says, and poor Penrose as perhaps innocent, perhaps stupid. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, the English love of understatement. You would call a murderer perhaps unfortunate. I think. Hastings reddened slightly. You don't mean you think Penrose did it? I mean, said Poirot carefully, that Penrose has the temperament of a man in love and in despair. Such a man is capable of anything but also of nothing. His heart, it pulls him in two directions. He is a complication, not a culprit. He turned from the window. No, Hastings, I look elsewhere. The poison was introduced into one glass, hers. The tray passed through many hands. Therefore, the question is not only who wanted her dead, but who had the opportunity to touch that glass unobserved. At that moment, a knock came at the door. Inspector Cray entered, looking tired and damp, his coat glistening with rain. I've spoken with the servants again, he said. Nothing useful. Dobson the butler insists the glasses were filled from the same decanter, then set on a tray. The footman, Oliver, carried the tray to the ballroom, and Miss Grant herself chose her glass. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And where was Oliver before that? In the anteroom with the butler. Ah, but not always with the butler, I think. Cray frowned. He says he never left the room. Poirot's mustache quivered. And he says it very firmly and a pas? Cray gave him a wary look. You think the footman did it? I think, Poirot said mildly, that when a man insists too much upon what he did not do, he betrays knowledge of what was done. By luncheon, the guests had gathered in a strained, uneasy silence. The dining room that had been filled with chatter and candlelight now echoed only with the clinking of cutlery and the rustle of napkins. Major Forbes sat glowering into his plate. Lady Margaret toyed with her soup but did not eat, and Arthur Penrose sat rigidly beside the window, staring out at the rain. Sir Reginald, attempting to rally spirits, said in his hearty baritone, "Well, we mustn't let tragedy turn us into statues, eh? The inspector will find the culprit soon enough." Beatrice Ellison gave a brittle laugh. "Yes, if we're not all dead of nerves first." Lady Margaret shot her cousin a warning glance. Poirot, who had been observing them in silence, dabbed delicately at his lips and said, "It is curious, is it not, how fear alters the appetite?" Sir Reginald turned to him. "You've something in mind, Monsieur Poirot?" "Always, Sir Reginald. But what I have in mind today is not yet what I have in proof." He smiled thinly. "Permit me to ask, who suggested the midnight toast?" Sir Reginald blinked. "Why, it's tradition. We always toast the summer at midnight. Everyone knows that." "Indeed," said Poirot. "But this year it was you who gave the signal, non?" The host frowned slightly. "Yes, I suppose I did." "And it was your servant who brought the tray?" Yes, Dobson arranged it. Poirot nodded slowly. And Miss Grant? She stood near the fireplace, beside Mr. Penrose? Lady Margaret, startled, said quickly, No, no, she was nearer to me. I remember because she laughed and said the bubbles tickled her nose. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Ah, and which glass did she take? Lady Margaret frowned. The one nearest her hand, I think. Why? Does that matter? Poirot's voice was quiet. It matters very much, madam, because one does not always take the glass nearest to one's hand, unless one has been directed to do so. He leaned back. It is a curious thing, but psychology tells us that the human mind is easily guided by suggestion. A glance, a word, a gesture. And one chooses the poisoned chalice oneself. No one spoke. Poirot smiled faintly. Forgive me. It is a philosophical reflection only. That afternoon, Poirot asked Hastings to accompany him on a short walk through the gardens, though the rain had lessened only slightly. They strolled along the gravel path, umbrellas held high, the scent of wet roses heavy in the air. Do you see, Hastings? Poirot said quietly. How already suspicion divides them? Lady Margaret watches her husband. Penrose avoids everyone, and the Major hides anger behind his calm. And the servants? Hastings asked. Ah, the servants, they see more than they speak. It is often so. Oliver the footman, for instance, a young man who lies badly. Hastings frowned. You think he's shielding someone? Perhaps. Or perhaps he was promised something, a small favor, a bit of money. Remember, mon ami, crime is rarely the work of a single mind. There is always a chain, and one link is weaker than the rest. Poirot stopped suddenly by the sundial. Look, voila! What is that? Hastings followed his gaze. Half hidden beneath a lavender bush lay a small object glinting dully in the damp earth. Poirot bent, retrieved it with a handkerchief, and examined it carefully. It was a silver lipstick case, its initials engraved in delicate script, e.g., Evelyn Grant, Hastings said softly. Poirot nodded. Dropped, perhaps, or discarded. He turned the case over. But look, Hastings. The rim bears traces of some dark powder. Not lipstick. Something else entirely. Poison. Or antidote, said Poirot. But which we do not yet know. He slipped the case into a small envelope. We will have this examined. It may be another red herring. But even red herrings, they lead one toward the sea of truth. When they returned to the house, they found Inspector Cray waiting. New development, he said grimly. The chemist's report on that perfume vial you found, it wasn't perfume at all. Mixture of chloroform and ether. Dangerous stuff. Poirot's brows lifted. Tiens. Then Mademoiselle Grant carried it. Why? Could have been for nerves, Cray suggested. Or maybe she was afraid of something. Afraid, Poirot murmured. Yes, that would fit. He turned toward the staircase. Come, Hastings. I think we must look again in Miss Grant's room. Her room was spacious and tastefully decorated, though now it had the air of a violated sanctuary. The bed was neatly made, her dressing table immaculate. Everything too orderly, too precise. Poirot ran a finger along the surface and frowned. You see, Hastings, there is order here, but not her order. The servants have tidied, yes, but they have also removed something. Removed? Poirot knelt beside the dressing table. Observe, a small impression in the dust where a box once stood. Jewelry, perhaps, but not taken by the police. He opened a drawer, examined a handkerchief, a photograph of Arthur Penrose, a small notepad. On the pad, faint indentations could be seen. Poirot shaded them lightly with a pencil. The words emerged slowly. Meet me by the fountain at 11. It must be tonight. I cannot endure this any longer. The signature was illegible, but the stroke of the pen suggested a man's hand. Firm, bold, confident. Hastings whistled softly. By Jove! That's something. Poirot folded the page carefully. Indeed, a clandestine meeting. At the very hour the poison was prepared. He straightened, his eyes gleaming. You see, Hastings? Already we chase many scents. the jealous fiancé, the charming soldier, the frightened hostess. Each could be the hunter or the hare. But soon, très bientôt, we shall know which of these red herrings conceals the shark. He paused at the door, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. For murder, my friend, he said softly, is never an accident of opportunity. It is the final act of a story written long before the curtain rises. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The next morning dawned still and pale, the kind of washed-out English light that makes everything seem cleaner than it truly is. The rain had passed, leaving the air sharp and cold. Foxwood Hall, however, remained cloaked in its own kind of fog. Suspicion. Breakfast was subdued. Even the clinking of silver spoons seemed too loud. Poirot entered the dining room late, immaculate as ever in a grey suit and a perfectly knotted tie, and offered a small bow of apology to Lady Margaret. "You must forgive me, madam. I was detained by a very small but very curious discovery." Lady Margaret, pale from lack of sleep, managed a wan smile. "You seem to live for discoveries, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head. "Ah, but life, madam, is composed entirely of details, and it is the detail that reveals the soul of things, and the soul of crimes." Arthur Penrose looked up sharply from his plate. "Then you've found something new?" Poirot's mustache quivered. "Perhaps, but before I speak, I must look again at the ballroom." He turned to Inspector Cray, who sat at the far end of the table nursing a tepid cup of tea. "Inspector, if you would be so kind as to accompany me?" Cray nodded. "Of course. What is it this time, Poirot?" "Another fingerprint on a glass." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, my friend. Something smaller. Much smaller." The ballroom was dreary in the daylight, its grandeur exposed as dust motes drifted in the weak sun filtering through tall windows. The decorations, golden ribbons, withered flowers, and the remains of confetti, gave a pathetic impression of gaiety now long extinguished. Poirot moved slowly, his eyes scanning the floor and tables with an almost reverential precision. "You see, Inspector," he said softly, "murder leaves a residue, not only of evil but of haste. Somewhere, the murderer forgot something." Cray, arms crossed, watched skeptically as Poirot examined the tray that had held the champagne glasses. The butler, Dobson, had kept it under lock and key since the night of the tragedy. Poirot crouched, adjusting his monocle, and ran a gloved finger along the silver rim. Then he paused. "Tiens, what is it?" Cray asked. Poirot held up the tray to the light. Near one corner, just at the edge of where the glass stems had rested, was a faint smudge, circular, dull, almost invisible. "Do you see, Inspector? Here, a mark left by something not of glass. Something round, yes, but flat. A ring, perhaps. A bottle." Cray frowned. "But what does that tell us?" Poirot smiled, the satisfaction of a hunter who has found a single track. "It tells us that the poison was not poured directly into the glass. It was transferred, perhaps from a small vial, and whoever did so placed the vial here, for only a second, before slipping it away again." He tapped the smudge gently. "You see, my friend, this is the moment when thought and action met." The hand trembled, the bottle left its trace, and in that instant, murder became inevitable. Cray was silent for a long moment. "You think you can identify the bottle?" "I can identify the mind that held it," Poirot replied quietly. "The rest will follow." Later that morning, Poirot asked for all the household to be assembled in the drawing room. The request was met with weary compliance, curiosity and fear now binding everyone together in a tense expectancy. Lady Margaret sat beside the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sir Reginald stood near the window, feigning nonchalance. Major Forbes lounged by the mantel, though his jaw was clenched. Arthur Penrose arrived last, pale but determined, followed by Mrs. Beatrice Ellison, who looked as though she had been weeping. Poirot took his place in the center of the room, small and dignified, like a conductor before an orchestra of nerves. "My friends," he began, "we have searched for the instrument of death, and at last I believe we have found its shadow. It is no longer a question of who could have poisoned Miss Grant, but who handled the poison vial itself. Lady Margaret shivered. You've found it. Not yet, madam, but I have found its impression. He described the faint circular smudge upon the tray. The guests listened in uneasy silence. So you see, he continued, the vial was placed there only for an instant. It was small, metallic, and most probably round, with a base of polished brass. Something easily concealed. But such things leave marks not only on silver, but also on the conscience. Sir Reginald gave a short, forced laugh. You make it sound almost supernatural, Poirot. Poirot's gaze shifted to him, mild but penetrating. Ah, but guilt, Sir Reginald, is supernatural. It defies the laws of silence. Even in perfect composure, it makes itself heard. He began to pace slowly. Let us consider. Who could have handled a small metal container that night? The servants, yes, but also others. Lady Margaret, you wore a bracelet with a small silver charm. Mrs. Ellison, you carried a vinaigrette case. And Major Forbes, you have, I believe, a cigarette case of brass. Forbes frowned. Yes, what of it? Poirot raised his eyebrows. Only that a cigarette case, opened hastily, could leave such a mark. That's absurd. Forbes snapped. I never touched that tray. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps not. Yet you were in the anteroom a few minutes before the toast. N'est-ce pas? Forbes hesitated. I was looking for Lady Margaret. She'd misplaced her fan. Lady Margaret looked startled. I? No, I hadn't. Poirot's eyes glittered. Indeed. Then we must ask. Why invent a reason to be there? Forbes flushed. You've no proof of anything. Poirot's tone softened. No, only logic, Major. But logic, it is a relentless adversary. After the gathering dispersed, Poirot returned to his small study table in the library. Hastings followed, eager and anxious. Poirot, do you really think Forbes is the murderer? Poirot shook his head. No, mon ami. Forbes is impulsive but not cold. And the poison, it required calculation, not courage. Forbes lies, yes, but about something smaller. Perhaps a rendezvous. Perhaps a secret of the heart. He paused. But someone else has lied about something far greater. Hastings frowned. You mean Lady Margaret? Poirot looked thoughtful. She too conceals something, but her fear is of discovery, not guilt. There is a difference. He took out the small silver lipstick case they had found near the fountain and placed it beside the perfume vial. Observe, Hastings, two small objects, both feminine, both designed to contain beauty, and yet one contained poison, the other perhaps the antidote. Is it not poetic? Hastings looked bewildered. I can't follow your reasoning at all. Poirot smiled. That is because, mon ami, you seek to explain rather than to understand. The clue lies not in what these objects are, but in where they were found. The lipstick by the fountain, the perfume in the handbag. 2 women, 2 roles. 1 victim, and one who may have feared becoming the next. Do you mean Lady Margaret again? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. Not Lady Margaret. Someone quieter, more observant. Someone who watches others and says little. His eyes narrowed. Mrs. Beatrice Ellison. That afternoon, Poirot paid Mrs. Ellison a visit in her room. She was sitting by the window, embroidery in her lap, though her hands trembled too much to work. Madame, Poirot said softly, I will not detain you long. I come only to ask one question. She looked up nervously. What is it? Why? Said Poirot gently. Did you wash your hands with lavender soap immediately after the toast? Her eyes widened. I don't know what you mean. Poirot stepped closer. The scent, madam. It was strong when I first spoke with you. And lavender, it has its uses to mask another smell. The smell, for instance, of metal or of bitter almonds. She gasped. You can't possibly. Ah, but I can, madam. Poirot's voice was soft but inexorable. And I can tell also that you are not the murderer. You handled the poison, yes, but not with malice. You handled it after the crime, perhaps to conceal it, perhaps to protect someone you love. Tears welled in her eyes. You mustn't, please don't say anything yet. It wasn't. Poirot raised a hand. Shoo. Say nothing now. When the time is right, you will speak. But remember, truth, like poison, does not remain hidden forever. When Poirot left the room, the first stars were already visible beyond the misty trees. He paused at the landing and looked down the long, dim hallway where portraits watched in eternal judgment. He murmured softly to himself, "Un detail, toujours un detail," the hand that trembled, the glass that glittered, the heart that hesitated, each leaves its trace. And soon, Hastings, soon, we shall see which trace leads to the soul of the killer. He straightened his tie, smoothed his lapel, and descended the staircase with that precise, measured grace that never failed him. A man following not a path, but a pattern of truth. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The following morning broke gray and wind-stirred. The lawns of Foxwood Hall were littered with the remnants of last night's storm. Leaves and small twigs scattered across the gravel drive, a broken branch lying like an accusation near the fountain. Inside, the atmosphere was no calmer. Breakfast had become a ritual of strained civility. Lady Margaret presided at the table with her usual grace, though her hands trembled slightly when she poured tea. Major Forbes pretended to read the Times, his jaw set, while Arthur Penrose stared blankly into his plate. Mrs. Ellison did not appear at all. Poirot entered late, immaculate as ever, his shoes gleaming, his tie perfectly symmetrical. Hastings followed a moment later, looking tired and rather subdued. "Good morning, my friends," said Poirot cheerfully, though his eyes missed nothing. "The weather, it seems, has conspired to cleanse the sins of the countryside, though, alas, it cannot do the same for our consciences." Sir Reginald scowled from behind his newspaper. "Still talking riddles, are you, Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not riddles, Sir Reginald, reflections. There are moments when nature imitates morality, and a pas." Lady Margaret forced a thin smile. "Have you made progress, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, madam. The pattern begins to take shape. But one must be careful. For sometimes, when one pulls a single thread, the whole tapestry unravels." He looked round the table, his gaze finally resting on Arthur Penrose. "I should like a word with you, Monsieur Penrose, when you have finished your breakfast." Arthur started, flushing slightly. "Of course." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Good. I promise it will not spoil your appetite, or, if it does, that will be most interesting." A few minutes later, they were seated in the small study overlooking the rose garden. The faint scent of damp earth drifted through the open window. Poirot leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "My dear Arthur," he began gently, "you are a young man of feeling. You loved Miss Grant, did you not?" Arthur hesitated. I admired her, yes. Everyone did." "Ah, admired. That is a word so conveniently ambiguous. But admiration, my friend, it can be very close to love. And love, as we know, can lead men and women to desperate acts." Arthur's voice was tight. "If you're suggesting I killed her, you're wrong." Poirot's tone remained calm. "I suggest nothing. I only observe that you were the last person seen speaking to her before the toast." Arthur swallowed. "She wanted to tell me something. Something she'd discovered." "Indeed? And did she tell you?" "No," Arthur's voice cracked. "She was afraid. Said she'd already gone too far. That someone had warned her to stop asking questions about." He broke off abruptly. Poirot leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "About what, mon ami?" Arthur hesitated, then said reluctantly, "About money, investments, something to do with the estate." Poirot nodded slowly. "Très bien. So Miss Grant had stumbled upon a financial impropriety, perhaps, and she confided in you. That, you see, gives motive not to you but to another." Arthur looked up sharply. "You mean Sir Reginald?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he rose and adjusted the vase of roses on the mantelpiece. "You must learn patience, my friend. The truth, it ripens only when it is ready." Poirot next sought out Lady Margaret, whom he found in the library, seated at the large oak desk, letters spread before her. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "More questions, Monsieur Poirot?" "Only one, madam. Why did you destroy the letter addressed to you by Miss Grant?" She stiffened. "How did you?" Poirot smiled gently. "The fragments, madam, were found in the fireplace. Your maid was not thorough with the brush." Lady Margaret's composure faltered. "It was nothing important." "Ah, but you read it before burning it, did you not?" "Yes." She turned away. She wrote only that she had discovered something disturbing, something she wished to discuss with me privately after the ball. "And yet you did not keep it?" Lady Margaret pressed a hand to her forehead. "I panicked. When she died, I thought, oh, I don't know what I thought, that it would look as though I'd known something." Poirot's gaze softened. "Fear, madam, is the child of secrecy. But secrecy, it grows stronger with every concealment. There is something more you hide, is there not?" Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't kill her, Monsieur Poirot, but I did lie to protect someone." "Whom?" Her lips trembled. "My husband." Poirot bowed slightly. "Then let us both hope, madam, that he deserves your protection." In the drawing room, Poirot found Sir Reginald standing at the window, gazing out over the damp lawns. His reflection in the glass looked older, more brittle. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said quietly, "you were a man of business, were you not?" Reginald turned, his tone defensive. "I still am." "Ah, then you will forgive me if I ask a question of finance. Foxwood Hall, it is entailed, yes? But the trust that maintains it, that is more flexible." Reginald's eyes narrowed. "I don't see how that concerns you." "It concerns me," Poirot said evenly, "because Miss Grant was seen in your study the afternoon of her death, and because she was overheard asking your secretary for copies of certain financial statements." Reginald's color drained. "That's absurd." "Is it? Then why?" Poirot continued softly. "Was there a missing page from your ledger? A page torn out rather crudely, I might add." Reginald's jaw tightened. "You've no right to pry into my affairs." Poirot bowed slightly. "When a young woman dies by poison, every affair becomes my affair." There was silence. Then Reginald said hoarsely, "She was going to expose me. A foolish investment, nothing criminal. But it would have ruined me socially." "So you destroyed the evidence?" "Yes." He looked away. "I tore out the page. But I didn't kill her, Poirot. By the time she died, the matter no longer mattered. She'd promised not to tell." Poirot regarded him for a long moment. "It is curious, is it not, Sir Reginald, how the truth always arrives at the same conclusion, whether by confession or by death." By afternoon, the fragile web of lies at Foxwood had begun to tear. Poirot's quiet persistence, his disarming courtesy, had drawn secrets from every corner of the house. Mrs. Ellison's absence from breakfast had not gone unnoticed. When she was finally found, she was sitting alone by the lake, a shawl around her shoulders. Poirot joined her in silence, watching the ripples move across the surface. "You are afraid, madam?" he said at last. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, I'm afraid the truth will hurt someone I care about." Poirot's tone was soft. "Truth, madam, it hurts only the guilty. And even then, it heals in the end." She turned to him suddenly, her eyes brimming with tears. "Miss Grant came to me that night. She said she'd found something terrible in Sir Reginald's papers. She was frightened, said she meant to confront him after the ball. I told her not to. I begged her." "Why?" "Because—" Mrs. Ellison hesitated. "Because she wasn't as innocent as she seemed. She'd been blackmailing him, Monsieur Poirot. She wanted money, to help someone." "Whom?" Mrs. Ellison's lips trembled. "Arthur. She was in love with him. He'd lost money gambling in London. She said she could make it right." Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes grew darker. "Ah, so the victim herself was not without sin." Mrs. Ellison nodded miserably. "She meant no harm, but she was reckless." Poirot rose. "Merci, madam. You have helped more than you know." That evening, As the lamps glowed softly in the great hall, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire. The air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and unease. "So now we know," Hastings said. "Sir Reginald was being blackmailed, Arthur was in debt, and Lady Margaret knew about both. But that doesn't tell us who poisoned Miss Grant." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but it tells us something far more important. It tells us who had to poison her." Hastings looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. "Consider, mon ami. Miss Grant threatened to expose Sir Reginald. But if she did, she would also expose Arthur's gambling debts and Lady Margaret's complicity. In one revelation, 3 lives would be destroyed. Tell me, which of those 3 would act? Not from hatred, but from necessity." Hastings frowned. "I suppose, Lady Margaret." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Perhaps. Or perhaps another who feared for her reputation more than her conscience." He rose, smoothing his lapels. "Tomorrow, Hastings, I shall invite them all once again to the drawing-room. It is time we tested their nerves." "Another of your little traps, Poirot?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Mais oui, for when one stirs the surface, mon ami, the lies, they float to the top." Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The morning sun filtered pale and diffused through the tall windows of Foxwood Hall, but its warmth did little to brighten the mood within. The house had grown quiet since the previous day, the lingering tension thick in the air like fog over the lawn. The servants moved silently, casting anxious glances at one another, while the guests sat in their rooms, restless and uneasy. Poirot, as ever, was immaculately dressed, his hair perfectly combed and mustache impeccably groomed. He entered the drawing-room first, followed by Hastings, who carried a small notebook, always ready for observations he rarely fully understood. Poirot's eyes swept across the room, taking in the anxious faces of Lady Margaret, Sir Reginald, Major Forbes, Arthur Penrose, and the visibly shaken Mrs. Beatrice Ellison. "Mess Amos," Poirot began, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of precision. "Today, we must confront not only the truth, but also ourselves. For when fear mingles with conscience, there are few who can resist the pull of revelation." Lady Margaret flinched slightly, adjusting her gloves. Sir Reginald shifted in his chair, and even Major Forbes straightened his back as though bracing for some invisible judgment. Poirot's gaze finally fell on Mrs. Ellison, who trembled at the corner of the room. "Madame Ellison," he said gently, "yesterday, you admitted that you knew something of Miss Grant's discoveries regarding Sir Reginald and Arthur. Today, I must ask you to speak more fully, for silence serves only those who seek to hide the truth." Mrs. Ellison's lips quivered. I cannot. It will ruin everything." "Ah, madam," Poirot said softly, stepping closer. "It is not ruin that awaits, but clarity. Once the truth is revealed, all pretenses are laid aside, and one may breathe freely. You will speak, and you will speak the whole truth. Now, please." For a long moment, she wavered, glancing at the others. Her eyes filled with tears, and at last, she spoke in a trembling voice. "It was Evelyn," her voice faltered. "She came to me because she wanted to help Arthur. She knew of his debts, his gambling losses, and she thought she could fix it. But she also found Sir Reginald's documents. His investments were fraudulent. She wanted to confront him, but she feared what would happen if she failed. She was frightened, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot nodded. "Yes, madam. And did you attempt to calm her?" "I did," she admitted. "I begged her not to confront him that night. But I did not want her to die. I never dreamed she would." She broke down, sobbing quietly. Poirot moved slightly closer, maintaining a gentle distance. "Madam, it is the emotion of love and fear that governs human actions more than reason alone. You were protecting a young woman, and perhaps protecting yourself. But now, the time has come for courage." Hastings whispered, "Poirot, she's nearly hysterical." Poirot shook his head gently. "Patience, Hastings. The revelation of fear is the prelude to the revelation of truth. Watch, listen." We are about to see the first crack in the carefully constructed facades. Poirot turned his attention to Arthur Penrose, who had remained pale and silent throughout Mrs. Ellison's confession. "Arthur," Poirot said softly, "yesterday, you admitted that Evelyn had confided in you. You also said that she was frightened. Tell me, was she afraid of someone in particular?" Arthur swallowed hard. "Yes, she feared my father. She thought he would be angry, not for money, but for the scandal it would cause." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah, and did you attempt to protect her, mon ami?" "Yes," Arthur admitted. "I tried to talk to my father, but he dismissed me. He said it was none of my concern." "And yet, monsieur," Poirot said softly, "the poisoned glass was chosen by Evelyn herself. Tell me, did she ever suspect anyone else?" Arthur hesitated, then nodded. She was worried about Major Forbes. She thought he might have overheard or noticed something unusual, but she never accused him. Not directly. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. "Very well, mon ami. That is important." Lady Margaret now spoke, her voice steady but her eyes revealing tension. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I must confess something as well. I knew that Evelyn had found something troubling. I tried to protect Sir Reginald, yes, but I also tried to protect the household, the family name. I never touched the poison. I swear it." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Madam, it is not guilt that betrays you. It is fear. And fear, when observed carefully, is a most instructive thing. You may speak freely here. All in good time shall be revealed." She drew a deep breath. "There is more," she continued. "I feared what Evelyn might do, and I warned her, begged her, not to confront Reginald that night. She ignored me. I thought I had controlled everything, but I had not. I had underestimated the consequences." Poirot tapped his fingers lightly on the armrest of his chair. "Indeed, madam, that is why your lies or partial truths were ineffective. You acted out of protective instinct, yes, but instinct alone cannot prevent tragedy. Now, we are beginning to understand the web of human emotion that surrounds the crime." Major Forbes shifted in his chair. "And what about me?" he asked, voice clipped. "Am I to confess next?" Poirot's eyes met his steadily. "Major Forbes, your presence that night was noted, your movements were observed, and yet your hand did not touch the fatal glass. But tell me, why were you near the anteroom moments before the toast?" "For I was looking for Lady Margaret," the Major admitted reluctantly. "She misplaced her fan. I went to return it. That's all." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Indeed. And yet, that small deviation, that brief presence, it caused fear in Evelyn. Fear of observation, fear of exposure. Fear, Major, is as much a weapon as any vial of poison." It was now Sir Reginald's turn. He sat stiffly in the armchair, glancing about the room. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "you've implied I am responsible in some way. I did nothing. Yes, Evelyn discovered my financial improprieties. Investments gone awry, some unwise speculation, but I did not touch her glass. I did not poison her." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "Sir Reginald, I do not accuse you. Yet your actions, tearing pages from the ledger, hiding documents, they created a situation where others feared exposure. Fear is a powerful motivator, as we have already seen." Reginald swallowed hard. "I only wanted to protect my family, our reputation." Poirot nodded slowly. "And indeed, Sir Reginald, you did succeed in one sense. But the consequences were unforeseen. You see, by hiding the truth, you allowed the poison to enter the picture. The chain of fear, the emotional pressures, the protective instincts, all combined to create opportunity for murder." Mrs. Ellison, now calm but still tearful, leaned forward. "I understand now," she said softly. "It wasn't my fault. I didn't give her the poison, but I was part of the chain of lies that made it possible." Poirot smiled gently. "Yes, madam, and that is why we must separate fear from intent. Only when we understand the motives, the emotions of each person, can we discern the actual perpetrator. Emotion, you see, is the invisible hand behind every crime. Hastings whispered, "So who actually poisoned her, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Ah, Hastings, that revelation is not yet for the morning. But today we have broken the dam. Secrets have begun to flow, confessions whispered, tears revealed. The emotional turning point, mon ami, is the moment when people can no longer bear the weight of their own deceptions. And now, we wait for the final confession, when the truth, like water, will rush forth unimpeded." He paused, gazing at each guest in turn. "Each of you has lied. Each of you has concealed. Each of you has acted out of fear or love. But the killer, my friends, acted with deliberate calculation. And soon, very soon, that calculation will be revealed." Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the windows. The house seemed to listen, waiting. Poirot straightened, smoothing his lapels with a precision that belied the tension in the room. "Tonight," he said softly, "we shall see how the human heart can betray reason, and how reason, in the end, triumphs over deceit." Hastings exhaled quietly, a mixture of awe and apprehension. "I never tire of watching you work, Poirot." "Ah, mon ami," said Poirot with a faint smile. "It is not work, it is art. And tonight, the final strokes will be made on this tragic canvas." Chapter 9. The Trap. The sky hung low over Foxwood Hall, a smothered gray pressing down on the estate as though nature itself anticipated what was to come. A storm threatened in the distance, its rumbling vibrations barely audible beneath the uneasy quiet that had settled upon the house. Servants whispered in corners. Guests avoided one another in corridors. The death of Evelyn Grant had cast a long, mournful shadow across every polished banister and oil-painted portrait. In the drawing-room, Hercule Poirot sat composedly near the fire, which crackled with a subdued warmth. His hands were folded neatly over his cane, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably alert. Hastings stood at his side, still trying to mask the tension that had crept into his shoulders. "Poirot," Hastings murmured, "I do wish you'd tell me what you have in mind. This whole arrangement, well, it feels like you're preparing an ambush." Poirot smiled faintly, his mustache curving with amusement. "An ambush? Non, mon ami. An ambush is crude. What I prepare is a salon of revelation. You will see, when the emotions have peaked, when fear, guilt, love, loyalty, and vanity all strain against one another, then the truth must emerge. It is inevitable, like the steam in a kettle. And you think gathering them all at once will force the truth out?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I do not think, Hastings. I know." He touched the small silver bell on the side table. "Would you be so good as to summon them? It is time." 10 minutes later, every principal guest of Foxwood Hall was assembled in the drawing-room. Sir Reginald stood rigidly near the window, his jaw clenched. Lady Margaret hovered at his side, her gloved hands twisting nervously. Arthur Penrose paced near the hearth until Poirot raised one elegant finger and he froze as though struck. Mrs. Beatrice Ellison sat near the chaise, composed but pale. Major Forbes gripped the back of a leather chair, knuckles white, and Miss Alice Trent lingered quietly behind Lady Margaret, her eyes lowered. Inspector Cray was present as well, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I don't quite understand your purpose, Poirot," he muttered. "This sort of meeting, well, it's highly irregular." "Precisely," said Poirot, without turning, "and therefore most effective." He stood up slowly, smoothing the front of his suit. The room fell silent. "My friends," he began, "you may wonder why I ask you to gather. It is because the moment has come when the small lies, the evasions, the hesitations, and the omissions of the past days can no longer continue." A ripple passed through the room. Poirot raised a hand. "You see, murder is not an act born of impulse alone. It is rooted in emotion, whether fear, jealousy, desperation, or even misguided affection. And in this household, each of you, in your own way, has been touched by such emotion." Lady Margaret swallowed hard. Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably. Poirot began to walk slowly across the room, pausing before each person as though inspecting works of art. "Let us begin with the glass," he said. "The fatal glass that contained the veronal. A glass chosen, apparently at random, by Mademoiselle Evelyn herself. Yet, it was not random at all." Arthur stiffened. "But she selected her own glass, didn't she?" Poirot turned to him. "Ah, you think so, mon ami? Yet I noticed something very interesting that night. When the tray was brought in, Evelyn hesitated. Only for a moment, but she hesitated. She was searching for something." "What?" Sir Reginald demanded. Poirot smiled faintly. "A small mark, a delicate indentation on the base of one flute. Only one glass bore this mark. She used it earlier in the evening." Evelyn was a young woman of particular habits. She disliked changing glasses once she had begun, and she believed, wrongly, that the glass she had used before remained clean, untouched. A murmur rose, quickly stifled. Poirot continued. "But someone else knew this habit. Someone who had spent much time with her. Someone who understood that if one were to prepare only that particular glass, then the victim would choose it herself." Arthur paled visibly. "My God!" he whispered. "Poirot, you surely can't think?" Poirot lifted a calming hand. "Patience. The truth must not be rushed. Not yet." He resumed pacing. "Now let us consider the poison veronal. A barbiturate, easily dissolved in champagne, almost tasteless. Not a poison of rage, but of calm design. A poison accessible only to a certain kind of person." His gaze rested briefly on Dr. Leonard Brooks, who stood uneasily near the doorway. I never left my case unattended," the doctor stammered. "Anyone could have." Poirot waved a hand. "Do not distress yourself. Your case I have already examined. The missing vial was not taken recently. It was taken weeks ago." The room stirred with confusion and alarm. Poirot's voice dropped. "Weeks ago. That suggests planning. A forethought inconsistent with a sudden quarrel, a sudden desperation. This was not a crime of passion." Beatrice Ellison let out an audible breath, and Poirot turned to her. "Madame Ellison, you feared Evelyn's plans. You begged her not to act. You worried that exposing Sir Reginald would also expose the young man whom you have known since childhood. But you did not kill her. Your fear immobilized you. It did not compel action." Mrs. Ellison bowed her head in relief, tears welling. Poirot moved on. "Sir Reginald, your secrets were indeed in danger of exposure, and your temper is no stranger to us. But your folly is one of pride, not murder. You tear pages. You do not take lives." Sir Reginald flinched but did not protest. "Lady Margaret," Poirot's tone softened. "Your instinct was to protect your husband, your household, your reputation. But you are not the architect of poison. Your weapon is silence, not veronal." Lady Margaret looked down, her throat tight. Poirot's eyes swept to Major Forbes. "Major, you pride yourself on honor. Yes, you feared scandal, you feared being dragged into the muddy waters of the Chudleigh's affairs. But the poison? That is not your method. You are no subtle serpent." Major Forbes exhaled shakily. Then Poirot stopped walking. He clasped his hands neatly before him. "We now come," he said softly, "to the heart of the matter." Arthur Penrose stiffened visibly. Miss Trent's breath caught in her throat. Poirot's voice dropped to a quiet, resonant hush. There was one person for whom Evelyn Grant's revelations meant ruin, not in society, but in love. One person whose future, whose happiness, whose dreams depended entirely upon her silence. One person who believed, mistakenly, that Evelyn's actions would destroy everything. He turned slowly. "Miss Alice Trent." Lady Margaret gasped softly and turned toward her companion. Miss Trent stood motionless, her face draining of color. "And no," she whispered. Poirot continued, relentless yet compassionate. "You loved Arthur. You loved him so deeply, so hopelessly, that you lived each day in quiet agony watching him court another. Evelyn Grant was not merely your rival. She was the woman who might have rescued him from ruin, or exposed it completely, ruining you as well." Miss Trent's lips trembled. You don't understand. Oh, but I do, Poirot said gently. You believed you were protecting him. You saw the ledger papers Evelyn carried. You overheard her conversation with Mrs. Ellison. You learned she intended to confront Sir Reginald after the ball. You knew it would end Arthur's last shred of hope for the future. Miss Trent shook her head frantically. I only wanted. You wanted to save him, Poirot finished. And so you planned. You took the Veronal weeks ago from Dr. Brooks's bag. You observed Evelyn's habits. You marked her favorite champagne flute with a tiny scratch. And on the night of the ball, you ensured that the flute nearest her hand bore your deadly gift. A strangled sob escaped her. Arthur staggered backward, eyes wide with horror. Miss Trent, he whispered. Alice, why? She turned toward him, tears streaming, her voice breaking. I did it for you. Everything I ever did was for you. She never loved you like I did. She wanted to control you, to use your misfortune. I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to see me. Arthur collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Poirot approached Miss Trent gently. Love, mademoiselle, is often the mother of the most terrible crimes. But love does not excuse them. Inspector Cray stepped forward, grim-faced. Alice Trent, he said solemnly, I must ask you to come with me. She didn't resist. She simply looked at Arthur one last time. Her voice, when it came, was soft and resigned. I never meant for it to end like this. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, as though in prayer. The heart, he murmured, is more dangerous than any poison. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The guests of Foxwood Hall gathered in the great drawing room with the air of people summoned to hear a verdict. The storm had passed, but a lingering heaviness seemed to cling to the walls. The chandeliers glowed with a subdued amber light as though reluctant to reveal what must now be seen clearly. Lady Margaret sat rigidly near the fireplace, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Sir Reginald stood behind her, one palm braced on the mantel, the other clutching an unlit cigarette. Colonel Frobisher paced. Charlotte Whitcomb wrung her gloves. Lionel Ashcombe stared out of the tall windows as if contemplating escape. At the center, standing before the low table where he had arranged several small objects, a broken glass stopper, a place card, a gold cufflink, and a folded napkin, was Hercule Poirot. He looked refreshed, composed, and infinitely certain. My friends, he began, his voice measured and calm. The hour has come. You are all present, and the truth, la vérité, waits to be spoken. I ask only that you listen with patience. When a crime such as this occurs, it is not only justice that is demanded, but understanding. Sir Reginald gave a broken laugh. Understanding? My wife's friend was poisoned in our home, at our table, during our grandest evening. I want the brute responsible, nothing more. Poirot inclined his head. And you shall have them, Sir Reginald. But first, a correction. Miss Trent was not poisoned by chance, nor by an impulsive act. No, her death was calculated, prepared, and executed by a mind that believed itself superior. It is the work of someone in this very room. Charlotte gave a gasp. Frobisher stopped pacing. Lady Margaret's knuckles whitened. Poirot touched the objects on the table lightly. All of this, every detail, tells a very simple story. Miss Eloise Trent was murdered because she knew the truth about a crime committed not yesterday, nor last week, but months ago. A crime of fraud, of altered legal documents, a stolen inheritance. And when she threatened to expose it, she was removed. Ashcombe turned sharply from the window. This is nonsense. Who here would risk everything for forgery? Poirot smiled mildly. Patience, monsieur. I will show you. He clasped his hands behind his back. Let us begin at the beginning. The toast. A glass of champagne laced with digitalis, but only Miss Trent's glass. Not a general poisoning, not an accident. No, a targeted, hand-delivered, eminently personal attack. He looked around, letting the silence gather weight. Who carried the tray? Footman. But the glasses were placed on the tray by someone else. Someone who ensured Miss Trent's glass was set apart with a tiny mark only they would recognize. Frobisher frowned. What mark? Poirot lifted the folded place card. This one. Her name card from the dinner table. It bears a smear barely visible of sealing wax. The same wax found melted on the stem of her glass. A private signal. Charlotte whispered. But who would have? Ah, Poirot interrupted. Now we come to motive. Miss Trent was, how do you English say, a difficult woman. Observant. Sharp. Not one to be deceived. She had discovered something connected to Foxwood Hall. Something that made the murderer desperate. He leaned closer to his audience. She discovered the truth about Lady Margaret. A murmur swept the room. Poirot! Sir Reginald blurted, stepping forward as though shield his wife. But Poirot raised a hand. Do not misunderstand. Lady Margaret did not commit murder, nor fraud. But she confided something unknowingly to the wrong person. Lady Margaret looked up, startled. I? But I have spoken to no one of importance. On the contrary, Poirot replied gently. Some months ago you mentioned, in a moment of stress, that your private charitable fund was dwindling. You feared a scandal if it became known. Only one person offered assistance. Miss Trent. She volunteered to help review the paperwork. Lady Margaret gasped softly. Yes, that is true. And she discovered that large sums had been siphoned from the fund. Signatures falsified. Transfers made to a hidden account abroad. Miss Trent knew numbers well, too well for the comfort of the thief. Poirot let the implication settle. The one who stole from Lady Margaret's charity fund is the murderer. Ashcombe clenched his jaw. Colonel Frobisher's brows gathered in confusion. Charlotte's eyes widened in dread. Sir Reginald muttered, But who? Ah! Poirot exclaimed, pointing a neat finger. Let us examine the psychology. Fraud on this scale requires three things: intelligence, access to paperwork, and the knowledge of how to disguise the transactions. There is only one person here who possesses these talents. Ashcombe stiffened. Poirot, I hope you are not implying. I am not implying, Poirot said. I am stating. He lifted the gold cufflink. This cufflink was found beneath the desk in Lady Margaret's private study, the very desk where the forged documents were created. A most distinctive design, engraved with initials. Everyone leaned forward. Poirot turned the cufflink in his fingers. L.A. Ashcombe's face drained of color. Louisa Whitcomb let out a cry. Colonel Frobisher stepped back in disbelief. Poirot's voice remained cool. Lionel Ashcombe, you siphoned the charity funds. Miss Trent uncovered your theft. You realized she meant to confront Lady Margaret after the ball. And so you prepared a poison digitalis, administered in a glass you marked with sealing wax from Lady Margaret's stationery, hoping the blame would fall on her. The perfect crime, NSC Pa. Ashcombe's hands trembled. Poirot, you misunderstand. This is absurd. I have no idea how my cufflink got there. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. But of course, the guilty man never does. Yet there is more. He picked up the broken glass stopper, the one Charlotte had found in the garden. This stopper belonged to a small medicine bottle, a bottle once used by Lady Margaret for her heart tonic. She told me she disposed of it weeks ago, yet it was found shattered in the far garden, smashed deliberately. Why? Because it once held digitalis, and the murderer used it. He destroyed the evidence afterwards. Poirot turned sharply. Monsieur Ashcombe, when we spoke in the study, you mentioned digitalis quite casually. Too casually. I had not yet told you the victim was poisoned with it. Ashcombe faltered. Perhaps I overheard. No, Poirot said softly. There was no opportunity. You knew because you administered it yourself. Ashcombe suddenly lunged toward the door, but Colonel Frobisher intercepted him with a forceful hand on the shoulder. The room erupted in gasps and cries. Lady Margaret stared at Ashcombe, horrified. Sir Reginald spoke through clenched teeth. You filth! You stole from my wife, and you murdered to cover it. Ashcombe's composure shattered. He sank into a chair, face buried in his hands. I had no choice, he choked. I was drowning in debt. The charity fund was easy. No one ever checked the accounts. Except her. She said she would expose everything. She looked at me with that cold little smile. She knew. I couldn't let her ruin me. Poirot regarded him with a mixture of sadness and cool certainty. And so you ruined yourself. Ashcombe looked up wildly. She wasn't supposed to die at once. I meant only to make her sick. Delay her. Stop her from speaking. But she drank it all, that cursed glass, and collapsed before I could do anything. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. There is no poison that kills a little, monsieur. There is only death. The inspector, pale and rigid, stepped forward. Lionel Ashcombe, I am arresting you for the murder of Eloise Trent and for theft by deception. You will come quietly, if you please. Ashcombe rose slowly, defeated. As he was escorted from the room, he turned once to Lady Margaret. I am sorry, he whispered. She did not answer. Her gaze had turned inward, pained and wounded. When the door closed behind the murderer, the tension drained from the room like air escaping a balloon. Sir Reginald sank into a chair. Charlotte began to cry softly. Frobisher muttered something about a damned shame. Lady Margaret stood, crossed the room to Poirot, and placed a trembling hand on his arm. Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly, how can one properly thank the man who has untangled a nightmare? Poirot bowed his head modestly. There is no need, Lady Margaret. I merely used the little gray cells, and they worked as they should. She managed a fragile smile. Poirot looked around the room once more. The heavy curtains, the half-burnt candles, the abandoned champagne glasses, and his gaze softened. There is a lesson in this, he murmured. When one commits a crime, it is not only the victim who suffers. The ripples spread, touching all who stand nearby. A single dishonest act grows, becomes a shadow, and finally destroys. Sir Reginald nodded solemnly. You are right, Poirot. You always are. Poirot gathered his hat and gloves. Alors, my work here is finished. I will leave you now to restore peace to Foxwood Hall. As he stepped into the cool night air, the stars emerging faintly above the dewy grounds, he allowed himself a rare sigh, half sorrow, half satisfaction. Another puzzle solved, he murmured, and Hercule Poirot walked into the night, immaculate as ever, leaving behind a house forever marked by the truth he had revealed.